I still remember the way my heart felt like it was lodged in my throat when I realized something was wrong. We had just arrived at the villa, a sprawling whitewashed suite nestled on a cliff overlooking the cerulean blue of the Aegean, and I was halfway through untying the straps on my suitcase when there was a knock at the door. I assumed it was room service, or perhaps a late offer of champagne from the hotel staff. Mira giggled and rose from the bed where she'd already begun unpacking her dresses, silk slips in blush tones, and a lightweight cardigan that fluttered whenever the sea breeze drifted through the open terrace doors. She didn't sound worried. She sounded delighted, as though the knock itself might be part of some grand romantic surprise she'd orchestrated for our honeymoon. I expected a bottle of Dom Perignon, maybe 2 flutes, frosted with condensation. Instead, the door swung open and revealed a man whose face I had only ever seen in photographs. Gerald Lennox, Mira's father. He stepped into the room wearing a crisp linen shirt, untucked but neatly pressed, and khaki trousers rolled up at the ankle. In his hand, he clutched a small duffel bag already packed, as though he'd anticipated this very moment, and his eyes danced with a triumphant gleam that made me realize he'd known every detail of our honeymoon plans. "You really thought I'd stay home?" he chirped, as though he'd interrupted the most ordinary afternoon, rather than the beginning of our married life. The way he surveyed the room, the scattered unpacked suitcases, the half-peeled welcome fruit basket, the thrown-back hotel towels, was as though he owned every square inch of that space and everyone in it. My blood chilled. For an instant, I felt as though the walls were closing in. Mira stood beside him, leaning into her father's side. Her laughter like a bell in the quiet of the suite. "He's just worried," she said, as though understanding why my face had gone pale and my hands had begun to tremble. "You worry too much, dear," she whispered, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. She smiled at me, and I wanted to reach across the room and kiss her, until the world righted itself. But then her father spoke again, and any warmth I felt drained away, leaving me numb. He dropped his bag by the entryway, as if setting down the tools of his own design, and surveyed me with the faintest smirk, as though daring me to protest his presence. "I suppose I ought to introduce myself properly to my son-in-law," he said, stepping forward. I swallowed against the dryness of my throat. The words lodged in my chest before I could force them out. "Mr. Lennox, I began, voice cracking, but he cut me off with a wave of his hand, as though dismissing a minor inconvenience. "Please, call me Gerald. We're family, are we not?" His tone was deceptively casual, as though he'd merely come to ensure his daughter had enough towels, enough pillows, enough anything to keep her comfortable. But everyone who looked at him, Mira included, knew that was not the case. He saw her as the one treasure in his life, and everyone else as an afterthought. I thought our honeymoon was going to be ours. My voice was low, shaking, and I could see a flicker of confusion pass across Mira's face before she looked away. I started toward her father's steadfast posture. "Honeymoon," she repeated, as though tasting the word for the first time. "Of course it is," she said, reaching for my hand. I let her take it, but my skin felt cold where her fingers brushed. "You just looked so happy." "I wanted to be part of the moment," Gerald explained, unabashed, as though his presence somehow enhanced the sanctity of a trip meant solely for the two of us. My mind raced back to the moment I first met Mira. 4 years ago. At that conference. In Austin. She was witty, vibrant. I'd fallen for her quick smile the second she turned toward me and asked a question about the speaker's opening remarks. I hadn't known then that her father was always close by. Following her to breakfast, calling 3 times a day, handling her finances, all in the name of protection. Back then, I convinced myself that he was simply a concerned widower who wanted the best for his only daughter. I told myself his involvement was love, and I was naive enough to believe it. But standing now in our honeymoon suite, my honeymoon suite, listening to him announce that he was essentially our shadow for the next 30 days, something inside me snapped. Mira's laughter echoed, a sound that used to make my chest ache with longing and delight. Now it sounded brittle, too bright, too brittle to be anything but a defense mechanism. "Dad, give him a break," she said, stepping closer to her father. "I told him you might." "Stop by! He's just surprised." Surprised? Right. A father's surprise was to flop himself onto our bed as though it were his personal recliner. "Adjust the pillows. Demand towels." Like he ran the place. "I could have sworn we booked a suite that sleeps two," I said, doing my best to keep my voice steady. "Good," Gerald replied, a glint in his eye. "That's exactly what we have here." My stomach twisted, and I realized I wanted nothing more than to leave Santorini behind. But I'd come here to celebrate our union, to believe that for once, every expectation would be ours to set together. Instead, I'd woken up next to a stranger who was all ready, stocking his side of the closet with shirts and slacks. Mira exchanged a glance with her father, then placed a hand on his arm. "He knows you love him," she said to her father, voice soft as sea breeze, "and I love him too." She turned to face me, a small tremble in her expression, one I'd never seen before. For a moment, I thought maybe this was her way of tempering her father's intrusion, like somehow her affection for me would make him step back. But then he chuckled, as if sharing some private joke with the universe. "Of course she does," he said. "She tells me all the time." He took a step closer, eyes never leaving mine. "But you'll learn to share her, son, because I won't be leaving." A wave of nausea hit me. I blinked hard, forcing myself not to show weakness. "I see," I said, though I saw nothing but betrayal. I stumbled back, as though the room itself had shifted. All I could think was, she knew. She let him do this. I could taste the salt of the sea on my lips when I glanced toward the balcony, as if the horizon beyond was calling me to freedom, but to go out there without resolving this would be to abandon our marriage before it even began. Still, I couldn't stand by and let him relegate me to some secondary role in my own relationship. I took a steadying breath, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the closet, where Gerald was already selecting a shirt from one